Hello and welcome to episode 49 of Handgun Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Machad from the wild woods of central Maine, and this is your home for all the news, information, and discussion in the handgunning world. This week, Weer'd Beard and I discuss what makes a handgun quote-unquote good and what things you can look at to choose the most appropriate handgun for your needs. So as always, Handgun Radio is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network, and Brownells helps make Handgun Radio possible. Selection, service, and satisfaction. Find it all at Brownells. If you're doing any shopping with Brownells, please use our affiliate link, handgunradio.com/Brownells, to help support the show. So how you doing tonight, Weird?
I am sick as a dog, but I'm better than I was when I told the people at Squirrel Report that do the show without me.
Was it a early Father's Day present?
Oh yeah, yep. I got that, and I got some poop, and yeah, she made it herself. So I'm very pleased with her.
Oh, that's very sweet. So we'll head into the week in review here. So found a supplier for the Colt 1903 rear and front firing pins. A listener, Bradley J, sent in some links, and I actually found what I was looking for. So thanks, Bradley. And hopefully I can have those ordered sometime soon. And also, there was a great article on the 9x23 Winchester that I saw posted online. I believe it was Shooting Times. And so I'm thinking we're going to do another episode on ARD cartridges very soon. I really liked that episode. I think that was probably episode 4 or 5 of Handgun Radio. And we talked about stuff like the 25 NAA and the 32 NAA, 3845, and just all these weird different cartridges. And for some reason, I really like those strange off-the-wall calibers. So I figured we'll do an episode on that pretty soon. And so, Weird, what did you do this week?
Well, I was supposed to go to the range today, but unfortunately, I was pretty much bedridden. So I wasn't bedridden, but I didn't have the. I get way too tired. I don't want to be. It's been too long since I've been to the range, so I really want to be able to concentrate on the basics instead of, oh man, I really feel bad. But I got some time off towards the end of the week, and I am planning on hitting the range, grabbing my revolvers because that is the best thing to get the basics back, and a couple other guns that I have bought and have not yet shot, and go to hit the range, and possibly, all things lucky, I hate detail stripping guns, but I've got an M&P 9 with a magazine disconnect, and I've got a couple of different ballpoint pen springs of various sizes, and seen a couple of videos on YouTube, and I'm gonna fix that sucker.
We gotta love those magazine disconnects. I mean, hey, at least we got a little bit of time off. I never have any time off from work, and I got this whole week off where doing my 25th birthday on Monday, and then taking the wife around the state, do a little bit of touring, so maybe we can slide some shooting in there somewhere.
Oh, I remember 25.
Oh, man. Was it that long ago, Weird?
10 years.
Well, I'll be saying that 10 years from now, so... So that about wraps up the week in review. So we're going to head into the main topic. We got a pretty good one lined up here for you guys, and that's going to be what makes a good handgun. So we're starting out talking basically not so much what makes a good handgun in your eyes and your personal view, but what makes a good handgun and sort of what people use to say, oh, this is a good handgun. So first off, you got to remember, we're not bashing certain brands or designs. I mean, that's not what we do here. We're just kind of discussing why maybe certain firearms and the way they're configured are less easy to use or less effective to use in certain circumstances. You know, not everyone has unlimited training resources. So when you're training, you know, you've got time, ammunition, energy, stuff like that. You got to be able to make the most out of the time you have out of the range with your defensive firearm. And we are talking about defensive firearms. We're not talking really... that's sort of what we're focusing on. I mean, we will bring up other guns, but mainly we're talking about what makes a good firearm for self-defense or concealed carry or something like that. And again, concealed carry can be very subjective depending upon your body type, you know, your height, or what kind of holster you use. So everyone has a different definition of good. It's very subjective. So we're just going to touch upon a few of the points that what people use to determine whether a handgun is good, and whether or not some of those points actually determine whether it's quote-unquote good. and hopefully kind of develop a yardstick to help people measure what makes a handgun good or effective. So, Weird, you've done quite a bit in the show notes here. Do you want to start off with probably the most important point for you?
Yeah, I mean, let me see, let me get where I got in here. But yeah, what is the handgun good for? I actually didn't know if you weren't specific on if you were focusing on if it was for defensive use exclusively. So, but there's a lot of different guns that are really, really good for one thing. There's a couple of guns that are, often referred to as Swiss Army guns that are good for a whole lot of different stuff and all of that. And so you got to think about, all right, what do you want? If you want one gun that'll do a whole bunch of stuff, especially if you don't have a lot of money, you might want to focus on, all right, how many different hats can this gun wear? If you're, like I said in the show notes, if you're looking to hunt deer at medium to long range with a revolver, you might want something totally different.
Well, and it's like you think about, like you said, how many different hats can this handgun wear? A good example of this might be something like the Smith & Wesson M&P 9, because it can be customized for different hand sizes. It can be used, the full-size one can be used for home defense, and with the right holster and someone who maybe is like a little bit taller than your average person, a full-size duty handgun can be pretty well concealed. Like I said, you have to have the right holster, but so there are many different handguns that do a lot of things pretty well, but they can only excel so much in certain areas before you start making sacrifices. And like, for instance, I know a guy who does competition, and he bought a Glock because he shoots 9mm in competition, but he likes 40 for self-defense. So he bought a barrel from Lone Wolf, so when he shoots competition, he uses 9mm out of his Glock. And then when he goes to his home defense, he puts the 40 barrel in, and he's all set.
And if he wants to go crazy, he can put a 357 SIG barrel in it.
Exactly. So, I mean, like something like that, especially with Glocks, I know they do that for some other guns, but I believe Glock's probably the most well-known and the most well-engineered because it's just been around for so long. You can sort of switch between calibers. A concept like the SIG P250, for instance, although there may have been some problems with it that they experienced, is still a decent idea, having the different frame sizes and the different calibers and top ends and having that one serialized trigger part.
Well, you got to be careful. I think this SIG P250. I mean, actually, I've my buddy JG, who's a sometimes host on the Squirrel Report. He got a one for T&E from SIG, and that was actually the only gun that he got for T&E evaluation that he had no failures whatsoever.
Really?
And yep, and he did not baby that thing at all. He brought it to the range and pulled out the box, and it was still shrink wrapped. And I'm like, you're gonna clean the packing grease off that? Nope. Just gonna throw a magazine into it, and it's a really neat gun. And all that. But when it first came out, I started looking into that information, and it's pretty expensive to convert it over into something different. I would almost say that you're not going to gain a whole lot more than if you were just to buy two separate guns. Some guns can be quickly and easily converted. I think the 250 is you might save $100. In the end, buying just a different frame. And I personally would always just prefer to get another gun instead of, an extra accessories, because God forbid you need one gun, it's going to be in the safe in the other condition.
Right. And I mean, so basically you think maybe it was a gun who was a good concept, but at a poor price point for consistent sales?
It's a fantastic concept. It was designed for Europe, though. There's so many countries in Europe where you're only allowed 4 handguns or something like that. I mean, there's a bunch of horrible countries that have a limit on how many guns you can own. And so, therefore, you buy that one serialized chassis, and then you can get a whole bunch of different guns.
Right.
So that makes perfect sense if the number of guns you can own is limited, but that's not the case in America.
Well, and you sort of talked about specialization a little bit before here, but you make a good example in the show notes of having an STI 2011 and 40 Smith & Wesson. You got a 20-round magazine, ultralight trigger, tungsten internals, reflex optic, and a compensator. You could use it in a pinch for home defense, but you're not going to be strapping that on and carrying it as a concealed weapon.
No, no, those open guns, they build them to make them heavy so that they don't move.
Right.
And you know, you add the big optics on the front. Some of them will have, you know, a cocking handle or a little, I don't even know what you call the little wing that they can slam against the barriers for barricade shooting and stuff like that. I mean, they're really, really cool guns, but they are really good for just one thing, and that's winning tournaments.
What they call that thing, something like the gas pedal, whatever they can put their thumb on or something.
Well, I mean, the gas pedal, I think, is always referred to as the gigantic thumb safety that they put on them, so that you don't miss that thumb safety. And you want to have that good thumb safety because, you know, the trigger pull is going to be measured in angstroms.
So moving on from that, though, like, you also have to consider the gun's history. So what did you put here under the history section, Weird?
Well, so here's one thing I think I'll be going back to this is I carry a 1911. I'm gonna be going back to the 1911 a lot because that's my absolute favorite gun. It's my go-to carry gun. It's my go-to home defense gun. I'm bought and sold to the 1911. But as I said to you before the show, if the 1911 came out today, I'd probably be writing on my blog about God, look at this piece of crap. Do they expect people to buy this? It's got a thumb safety, and it's got a grip safety, and it's got that weird swinging link system. It's just altogether too complicated of a gun. It's just nothing but failure points. But with the history of the 1911, people have, you know, carried it in battle. People have carried it for carry guns for, so many years. It was the #1 carry gun for a long time in America, and all of that. And police officers have used them. It's a gun that just works. So sometimes a gun might look funny. It might not look like it's a good idea. It might not look like it's a great concept, but it may work.
And do you think it's sort of like maybe some nostalgia? People still stick with the 1911, or does it have, with the modern improvements, still a place in the fighting arsenal?
I think so. I mean, I don't see how. As I said, there was one person on a forum a long time ago that was saying, "Oh man, the only thing I've got is this Smith & Wesson Model 10, and it'll only take 38 special." And the person didn't have a whole lot of money, and they were just wondering, should I do something drastic to try to get enough money to get a 357 or a semi-automatic? And I pointed out the fact that 38 Smith & Wesson 38 special was a military cartridge. It was a common police cartridge. It's killed people dead. Human biology hasn't changed that much. So anything that was tried and true, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, is still going to work just as well as it did back then. Just the question is, has things improved? Obviously we're doing a whole lot better than, having flintlocks. But still, if you wanted to point a flintlock at somebody, it would do just as good as it did to a British soldier back in the Revolutionary War.
Exactly. I mean, for instance, here's a perfect example, and I know you said the 1911, but people who are listening can't see this, but for the viewers, it's a Colt 1903, and it is clear. It's currently broken right now, so it wouldn't fire anyway, but it's in 32 ACP, and it's fairly large. If you look at that in terms of my palm of my hand, it's still a very large handgun. But when this gun came out, it was considered a pocket pistol. I mean, back then they had very large trench coats with very large pockets, but still, I mean, this is a pistol that we would see today in 9mm. If this came out today in 32 ACP and it was this big, people would laugh at it. So, I mean, it's all about the context. Context makes a huge difference when you're talking about, like, you own a 1908 Weird, and that's in 25 ACP. And most people nowadays laugh at 25 ACP, but back in the day, 25 was, a fine round for a pocket gun.
Oh yeah, no, there was tons of guns in 25, especially if you wanted something really, really small.
And right, so, and how many times have we heard someone say, "Man, if you shoot me with that 25 and I find out about it, I'm going to be pissed."
Yeah, well, they might not find out about it if you put the shot right.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it all depends on your context. It really does. With the 1903, I would love to see a 1903 in 9mm come out, but if that were to release today in that size, I mean, I would dare say, if I haven't compared it to a Remington 51, the new one, but I would dare say it's pretty much the same size. So it just makes a huge difference. people think the single action army is anachronistic because it's a single action cowboy gun, quote unquote. But look at guns you've got for hunting, like the Ruger Blackhawk, and the larger single actions like the Freedom Arms and stuff like that. So just because they were made in a different time and they serve a very specific purpose does not mean they're not a good gun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of popularity, how can that affect what someone will say is a good gun?
Well, here's a really, really good one that I talked about on my blog ages ago. But Car, I love Car. Every show I've got to do some fanboy love of Car. They make what's called the TP45. It's a 4-inch barrel 45 that takes 7-round single stack magazine. So it's essentially a little bit smaller than a commander size 1911, which is my primary carry gun. But it's a little bit smaller in the barrel length, but it also doesn't have the big beaver tail on it. It doesn't have a safety. It's got that, the Car double action trigger pull. It just, in my opinion, it's a superior gun to the 1911. All things given. But the big question is, with that TP45, I can't buy a holster body for it for my Galco Miami Classic. They don't make a holster for that. They don't make a ton of holsters for that gun. The only magazines available for it are 7-round magazines, so you can't get the extended 8-round or 9-round or 10-round, or with a 1911 you can get. And somebody made a drum mag for it. I don't know if it works or not, but it was you've got that sort of stuff. I mean, it's when you go to like a holster manufacturer, you're going to see a ton of 1911s in their demo models, because it's just such an old and storied gun that people have them. And so when someone starts up making holsters, one of the first things they're going to do is they're going to take the 1911, the Smith & Wesson K frame, the Smith & Wesson J frame, the Glock series, and all of that, because those are all guaranteed wins.
Right.
If you've got a gun like the Car TP45, it's a little bit more of a fringe element gun. Walther is making a whole bunch of really, really interesting guns right now, but not a whole lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon to buy guns from to make holsters from Walther. Same thing with the Chiappa Rhino. The Chiappa Rhino was like the super ultra mega hotness for a little while, and that kind of died off. But I mean, you can't find any accessories for those.
Well, Rhino actually shipped with their own. Well, I don't know if it shipped with, but you could purchase direct from them a holster.
I believe they shipped with a little paddle holster or a little inside the waistband holster. But again, it's one of those. That's great if that's the holster you want. But
right.
But everyone's going to carry a little bit differently.
And going back to the 1903, I mean, that was the case with that. I looked everywhere online for a 1903 holster, and I actually, for some reason, I went to Cabela's and I found the medium-sized, like just generic Bulldog, belt slide holster, and sure enough, it fit it almost like it was exactly made for it, and it was a complete gamble. I think I paid like $15 for the holster, and I couldn't believe it. I slid it in. I was like, wow.
Does that retain it? Do you turn it upside down, or will it fall right out?
No, it'll fall right out, so I want to put a strap on there or something. I mean, this is definitely not a carry holster for, like, out and about, but it's a nice little range holster, but it's pretty secure in there. I mean, if you were running pretty fast, I'm sure it might come out, but so that needs a retaining strap. But, I mean, unless you get lucky like that and you have a, off-the-wall handgun that isn't, quite as ubiquitous as, say, a Glock or an M&P, you may run into issues with that, especially holsters, but also, magazine compatibility, stuff like that.
And you mentioned the Smith & Wesson M&P 9 full size. I mean, it's not a humongous gun. I mean, it's not some gigantic thing. It's about the same size as my Smith & Wesson 1911 SC. So it's the same size as a Commander 1911 thereabouts. And so, I've got a friend whose husband makes holsters, and she carries concealed. She's a little tiny half Filipino woman. She probably weighs, I don't know, I'm not going to guess her weight, but she's small. She's a small woman, and she carries a FNP 45 tactical. So it's got the high-rise sight and the extended barrel. She carries it concealed. I've seen her do it, and it conceals beautifully, and not under like some, she's not wearing a heavy trench coat or all that, just under normal clothing. It's the way the holster is built, and it fits just right for it. And so it's one of those, if you want to if you have just one gun that's wearing a lot of hats, chances are, unless you've got a really, really odd body type or something like that, you probably can carry it concealed, but you may need to shop around for holsters a lot just to see. Some tuck it up a little tighter, some rake it a little bit more, a little bit less, some pull it in tighter, some don't pull it in quite as tight. You'll find something that you like, but the problem is that if you've got a little bit more of an oddball gun, you may not be able to find that.
That's crazy. She carries an FMP 45 tactical. That thing is massive.
It's huge. They call it the Tactical Weer'd box.
Oh man, that thing is like the Colt Walker of like modern handguns.
Yep, and she's probably about the same size as your wife, and so It's one of those. There's nothing that you really can't conceal. I mean, maybe like maybe an AR pistol sort of idea. There's limits to everything, but
right.
But it's with the way holsters are going these days, and people are really being smart, really thinking about the way things work, and depending on how your body works and where you've got real estate to conceal the gun. You can figure it out.
Well, and this next one kind of touches upon the whole going with an oddball gun and having a hard time to find holsters, but this is more of the internal thing. And going back to the 1903 again, I have a similar experience. How efficiently is it constructed, and does it have a weird manual of arms? Does the gun have bizarre or numerous parts? The Colt 1903, for some reason, has 2 separate firing pins, a rear firing pin and a front firing pin. The rear firing pin on mine broke, so now I have to order a new one. But why have 2 firing pins? And if someone does know out there why there are 2, let me know, because I'm kind of curious myself, because most guns nowadays just have 1.
Yeah, and so if you've got if the gun's really, really simple in construction, that's less stuff to break. And then on top of that, everyone talks about how simple Glocks are. They've got, I don't know, there's true Glock owners know exactly how many parts are in a Glock, but there aren't that many. And also on top of that, since it's such a popular gun, if you break it, you can have that part tomorrow, shipped overnight to you. Or you can even probably walk into a gun store and say, hey, I snapped the extractor on my Glock. Hey, my recoil spring's worn out. Hey, my the firing pin on my striker broke off. Do you have a new striker assembly? I need a different trigger reset spring.
Well, and one other thing to note too, especially with the Glocks, I've heard stories, and I actually had someone that I knew had this happen to them. If a part, how many parts are critical to the function of the firearm? I mean, every part is critical, or else it wouldn't be there. Well, sometimes, but if the part breaks, will it cause the gun to malfunction? Will it cause the gun to cease operating? And I knew someone who had shot a Glock in competition and had the trigger pin, the pin that the trigger pivots on there, snap in the middle of a string of fire, and they didn't realize it. They finished the whole match with that gun and did not realize it until they were done.
Wow.
And so, I mean, yes, parts will break. That's a given. But how with the Colt, for instance, I had a catastrophic parts breakage, because if you don't have a firing pin, you're really not going to set the round off. But does it have a lot of these small intricate parts that if one of them, if one little piece gets thrown into the cogs, will it just stop the whole machine?
Yep.
So in terms of safeties, how can that affect whether or not a handgun is good?
Well, I mean, first up, I love the 1911, and it's got altogether too many safeties. But hey, it works. So what am I really complaining about? But at the same time, my other carry gun is a Car PM45, and the only thing that gun's got is a long double action trigger and a firing pin block. So that's all you need, and it's done with just a simple rotating cam. I think I sent you a picture of the inside of my car. There's nothing in the gun. It's got a lot of similarities to a Glock in its construction, and so it's a very, very, very simple gun and simple design, and all of that, and that just makes the manual arms that much easier. Same thing with a revolver. You fish it out of your pocket, and you get the sights on the target, you squeeze the trigger.
Right. And with you talking about the 1911, that kind of brings up something else in terms of safeties. For me, on a 1911, and you can tell, I'm not much of a 1911 shooter. I have shot other people's, but I've never owned one personally. But I always tend, I did this on my Browning because it did have an enlarged thumb safety. And I don't know whether this is a good or a bad thing, but I would, after I swept the safety off, I would ride my thumb on the safety like it was the gas pedal, like we talked about.
Yep.
To just try to help keep control on the gun and keep the muzzle flipped down.
That's the only way I shoot the 1911, and that kind of mitigates that a little bit. Is it by me assuming a firing grip on that gun, the safety is off. That gun is ready to fire.
Exactly.
So as soon as the muzzle clears the holster, that safety's off, and then the safety goes back on when I reholster the gun.
I just feel like I can bear down a lot better, putting my thumb on that and really just, I'm afraid sometimes I might break the damn thing off, but.
Yeah, if it's built well, it's not gonna do that. But yeah, no, it does. It takes a little getting used to. Somebody taught me how to do that, and the first time I did that, I was pulling shots low like crazy, and then you eventually figure out how to get it tensioned in just right, and then it really makes it a lot faster because that muzzle's gonna want to go up. And your thumb on that safety is going to push it down, and that's actually a pretty common thing. I mean, when you see a lot of guns that have quote unquote target grips on them, they'll usually actually have a big swell for your thumb. And
right.
That's exactly what it's there for. That you can apply a little bit of torque, so that you can push through that recoil curve.
Well, in my mind, like the 1911, and getting back to the safeties part of it, they have, if I were to design it nowadays, ditch the grip safety. I was really a huge fan, and I don't remember who did it, but they made a drop-in back strap that completely negated the grip safety. It removed the pivoting point and removed the whole back, and it was just a one-piece back strap. I don't remember who did that, but it basically made it so the safety was engaged all the time. And the only other thing I would really want, and it would be the light firing pin and the heavy firing pin spring to make it drop safe. Other than that, I mean, it's a single action pistol, so yes, I want that thumb safety, but the grip safety is, why is it there?
Well, I mean, it was actually, I think, all right, I might be a little bit off because I have not been to Ogden and gone to the museum. That is on my bucket list, but I believe since John Browning was a lefty, the original 1911 just had the grip safety. It did not have a thumb safety. And so the idea was as soon as you grab that gun and pull it out of the holster, the gun is hot. And it didn't matter if you were a lefty or a righty. And a lot of his guns were designed that way. But of course also John Browning was one of those guys that he always aimed to please. So if somebody said do this, do that. I mean the same thing goes with the Browning high power. It was originally created with an external extractor, and I think does your 1903 have an external extractor?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, Browning loved external extractors, but the 1911 has an internal extractor, and certain Browning high powers have internal extractors, and that was done at the request of the militaries that were contracting them. So he was just tagging along with that.
Now, do you have any idea why they would request an internal extractor as opposed to something that? Wouldn't an external extractor be much easier to repair, on the fly?
Maybe it's so dirt and dust doesn't get into it. I don't know. I carry a Smith & Wesson. It's got an external extractor.
Oh, okay, so they do make that change on theirs.
Yeah, there's a few. Kimber made them for a little while too, and they didn't work.
Right.
Hey, Mel!
Yep, here it comes. So kind of moving into ease of use, which is also really important when you're looking for a good gun. How easy is the gun to shoot? And we talk about shootability a lot on the show, and stuff like, and I'm guilty of this. I've said it many times. I was really mad and disappointed when Ruger came out with the LC9 because I said for years the LCP should be a 9mm. I don't know why they didn't make it 9mm. They could fit it. Let's do it. And after a while, and after thinking about it, I was like, you know what? That would be probably a handful. And the same holds true for like the Airweight 357s that J-frame that Smith & Wesson makes, the Airweight J-frames. You've shot some of those, haven't you, Weer'd?
Oh yeah, they hurt.
Yep.
It's like getting hit in the hand with a hammer. I would actually put a Smith & Wesson 357 Airweight J-frame above a 500 Magnum in discomfort to shoot.
Oh, easily. I've shot a airweight J frame, and it was like, a week before that, I'd fired a Red Hawk 44 Magnum, and I was like, man, I'd like to shoot that Red Hawk all day, but this thing, I'm done. I'm good. 38 Special Plus P is enough for me.
Yeah, but also, there's also those simple mechanics. But like I said, I've got, another one of my carry guns is my Ruger LCR 357, and how that. I'm not exactly sure if it's the tamer grip or if it's the polymer frame or if it's a combination of the both, but that gun does not feel like a Smith & Wesson airweight, even though it's only about 2 ounces heavier. It shoots very, 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 very nice, and it's a handful. It's one of those, it's not a beginner's gun, but it's also not outlandish. So some guns do better. I know a good friend of mine. He had a what is it, the 640. What's the all steel 357 J frame?
Yeah, I think it's 640.
Yeah, he had a 640, and he's got fairly small hands, and he had the Tyler T grip on it. Plus, he likes having his guns have that retro look to them, and so he's got he had the Tyler T grip on it. And I picked up this gun, and I'm like, okay, it's all steel. It's it's a hefty gun, and and I've shot airweights, and they're uncomfortable to shoot, but I'm not going to shoot this thing all day. I'm just going to run a mag. I couldn't finish a cylinder. I shot the first 2 and just went, God, for whatever reason, it might have been the T grip, or I think he had those skinny vintage wood grips on it. But whatever it was, that gun just pounded on my hand, and it was severely unpleasant. And there's some physiological reason for it, but it's just one of those. It just didn't work for my hand. And certain guns do that. My wife despises my CZ82 because the beaver tail just digs into the webbing of her hand on recoil. Doesn't bother me all that much. It's a little bit of a it's all steel backstrap. So if I'm shooting 100, 200 rounds on it, there might be a little pink in the webbing of my thumb, but it's not uncomfortable to shoot.
Well, it's sort of talking about that, like you said, your wife hates the CZ82. Is that 9x18 Mac, or is it 380?
They make them in both, and they've also made, the 83 comes in 380 and 32. Okay. Exact same gun.
A funny little anecdote. I was gonna buy, I think it's like 3 or 4 years ago, I was gonna purchase a SIG P230 in 380 ACP, and it's sort of, for people who aren't familiar with it, it sort of looks like a Walther PPK, but it's a little bit different. And it was the blued version, not the stainless steel one with the plastic grips or Bakelite. I'm not sure what they were. And I've shot LCPs, I've shot Walther PPKs, never had a problem, didn't hurt my hand. I don't even get slide bite or like the slide things that happen with a Walther PPK on a lot of people, and I have fairly large hands. And this P230, every shot, it felt like I was holding a metal baseball bat and I had just whacked a wall. My hand stung, and it was a 380, and I couldn't understand it. And I'm very glad that I shot it before I bought it.
Yeah, that's a good advice thing. Shoot it before you buy it.
Definitely. You would think a 380, and it was all steel, or steel and aluminum. I think the frame was made out of aluminum. But you wouldn't think that would be a painful gun to shoot. But for me, I was just, this gun is no fun to shoot. I said, I'm not going to practice with this, so I'm not going to buy it.
Yeah. No, that's the same thing with my Car PM45. It's a super lightweight, itty-bitty, teeny-tiny 45. It's rated for plus P ammo. And it was a nightmare for me to get a hold of it because I live in Massachusetts, even though the gun's made in Massachusetts. But, my full plan was, well, it's not a Massachusetts legal gun, so once I get it into the state and it's in my possession, I can then sell it to anybody else. Even if I shoot 200 rounds through the gun and decide it's not for me, I can still sell it for the exact same price. If I wanted to be a jerk, I could even raise the price, and I could find a buyer for it because you just can't get them.
Right.
And and there's a bunch of guns like that in Massachusetts. But I was prepared for this gun to be a gun that on paper it looked like the perfect pocket pistol for me to carry. And it turned out it was, but I had a whole lot of reservations for it because it's just so light, so thin, and all of that I just didn't know if it was going to be a complete and utter handful. And even was going on with the fact of maybe I should pick out some I carry plus P 45s I've got a pretty good stock of them, and I'm like, maybe I should look into some standard pressure 45s just for this gun, and realize no, shoot sells just fine too. But you never know with a gun. You know, like I said, I shot a bazillion Smith & Wesson revolvers, and this one is a heavy 357J frame. I've shot a 12-ounce 357J frame, and it's fun for me. But this heavy 357J frame just hurt me. So, you know, it's a very, very personal thing. Same thing with a buddy of mine. When I pick up a 1911, that grip safety goes off. It doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. You know, by the way, Ryan, if you ever have a 1911 and you decide that the grip safety is not for you, one of the quick, easy things, real cheap, if you know a gunsmith, or if you think you could do it, I wouldn't, but you can just drill a hole through the frame and through the grip safety and pin it in place.
Oh, yeah.
You need to take that grip safety off to detail strip the gun, but if you put a roll pin through it, you can just hammer that roll pin out, and then suddenly the grip safety will pop loose. But you can hammer it. You can roll pin it to the unsafe position.
Well, I plan on having one in 38 Super someday, so I will make sure I remember that.
Aw, 9x23 semi-rimmed. But but this buddy of mine, he picked up my 1911, and he actually cut his finger on the serrated trigger of this gun, because he just kept squeezing and kept squeezing and kept squeezing, and it wouldn't go, because just the way his hands fit around that gun, the grip safety didn't go off. And I when I teach new shooters, this was the first time he'd ever shot a gun. Well, this wasn't the first gun he had shot, but this is one of his first trips to the range. I try not to boggle people's minds down with, you know, all right, this is the safety, and here's the loaded chamber indicator, and here's how you do a press check, and no, don't teach them that stuff later. If they get really, really interested in that specific gun, they can learn how to field strip it and do all that crazy stuff. And at that point in time, just here's the gun, pick it up, keep your finger off the trigger, point it at the target, shoot it, sort of idea. And I forgot to tell him, just so you know, you have to this grip safety needs to be squeezed down for the gun to fire. And I just forgot about it, because it just isn't. No 1911 I've ever picked up, the grip safety has not gone off as soon as I've assumed a firing grip.
Right.
And this guy, just the way his hand was, he had enough room for that grip safety to pop up, and it did not depress. And so he just kept squeezing that trigger, and he probably put 20 or 30 pounds of pressure on that trigger, and it ganked up his finger a little bit. And I went, oh, you probably don't have the grip safety pressed. So some guns just won't fit your hands.
Right.
45s and 38 supers and 10 millimeters and all, and 7.62 by 25 millimeter and all these other stuff. That's a long cartridge, and so to have that long cartridge, you need to have a long grip frame. And if you've got short fingers or really fat bear paw type hands, that may not be a comfortable gun for you. That's actually why Glock came out with the completely ill-advised and dismal failure 45 gap, was just to make a 45 caliber gun that you could fit a small hand around.
Right, and it's like when I was talking about the LCP too in 9. I mean, you think about it, that's going to make the grip a little bit longer, not by much, because 380 and 9 there's not too much of a difference there. But I think it was more so they couldn't do it because of the bullet weight and the length of the bullet. And if anybody at Ruger is listening, a little bit of a digression, please make me an LCP and 22 long rifle. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be a very, very wise thing.
Oh, that would be awesome. I would go out and buy one.
We need to wait for Gaston to die before we can get the Glock carbine and before we can get the 22 caliber Glock. But old Bill's in the ground. You don't need to worry about ticking him off.
The 22 long rifle Glock with 30 round magazine.
Ooh. Well, that would
be pretty awesome.
That might be tricky. It's tough getting a double stack with a rimmed cartridge.
That is true.
Just read the manual on how to load a Kel-Tec PMR 30.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, it's got you gotta stand on your head and you gotta do the hokey pokey while you're loading that thing. I don't know if it's all completely necessary. I think somebody who has one told me that they can sometimes cheat it a little bit, but they'll say, load 10 rounds and tap it and bang it, and then load 5 more rounds or 10 more. There's a weird step on making sure that you don't get rim lock.
Oh, I got to do the same thing with my Colt. Make sure you come in from the top and slide up against the front of the rim of the cartridge below it.
Yep.
So moving on, like how easy is the gun to deploy is also really important. You know, is the gun light enough to carry all day, every day? Is it something that's going to be heavy in your pocket, and when you walk, you know, someone's going to see this pocket that's just got something really heavy in it banging up against your leg? I mean, that kind of sort of goes into the whole can you conceal it well too. So you talked about the 454 and how that could be deployed weird, right?
Well, no, I was talking about just it. Wait, what did I say about the 454? Now I'm trying to remember where we're going, but I'll just skip. I'll just skip ahead with that. But you know, things like for me personally, for carrying every day, I really like a super duper thin gun. When I got my Commander 1911, it had standard width 1911 grips on it, and just it printed a little bit, but not badly. I mean, I carried it for weeks. But I got a pair of the Chip McCormick Slimline grips, and all of a sudden that gun was so much more comfortable. It wasn't as comfortable to shoot because I really like that full-size grip on the gun. But you know, when it comes to a carry gun, you gotta make some concessions. You know, another thing to think about for deploying a gun is, you know, how, you know, what are the safeties like? You were talking about your 1903 safety.
Yeah, it's really small. It's not intuitive at all. I've seen people who have had these customized, and they'll actually get sort of like a 1911 style safety. I don't know how well you can see that, but it runs flat up against the frame. And the 1903 is a very slim pistol, and the safety is just awkward to manipulate. I mean, if you're lucky, you can catch it with the inside edge of your thumb when you're bringing the gun out, sort of like you would with the 1911, but it's not as positive by any means.
Same thing also goes for if you've got like a Beretta 92 or a Walther PPK or something where it's got the safety up on the slide. A lot of people don't like those because they've got to do like a weird finger dance to get their hand up high enough to turn that safety off. You know, and then of course you got the Makarovs where the safety goes the wrong way. I've never actually shot a Makarov, but man, I believe the safety has to be down for the gun to fire. So you have to get your thumb way the heck up there if you're carrying a Makarov with a round in the chamber and the gun on safe. Is the safety is going to be in the fire if Makarov is very similar to the Walther PP, and in the Walther PP, if that safety is parallel with the bore, the gun's on fire. And then when you pull it down, you just got to hit that nub and knock it up, and it's on fire. With the Makarov, you actually have to knock it down like you were knocking a 1911 safety down, but it's up on the slide.
Which is, yeah, that's weird. The slide, not so much for me, but for a lot of people I know, they have problems with it. And we're not, like we said, we're not saying the Beretta series guns or the Walther guns are bad guns. Just having that slide safety up there, you know, may not be the most efficient way to place a safety on the gun. And for a lot of people, that is a difficult thing to do, because, I mean, the goal is to be able to actuate that safety and turn it on and off without having to alter your firing grip.
Yep.
And with those guns, for a lot of people, it's just not possible.
Same thing goes with the Ruger Pocket 9mm and the M&P Shield. They've got those. The safeties are almost identical on those guns. It's kind of uncanny, but the fanning that little teeny tiny safety. I've shot the LC9 and I tried it out with the safety, and I found it was a pain to get it on. And actually I did the same thing. The Smith & Wesson Bodyguard's got a very similar, Bodyguard 380's got a very similar safety as well. And those safeties you really got to get your thumbnail kind of into it to engage the safety.
Right.
But to flick it off, really, you just got to brush it and all of that. But again, they're very small. They're very low profile. You might miss them, and if you miss that safety and seconds count, that's a big deal.
Well, and they're not very intuitive. I mean, like you said, you can barely see the damn things, let alone hit them with your thumb.
Yep.
And like the LC9, and I've worked with the Bodyguard 380, and it's just like, if I had those, I wouldn't use the safety on those because they have a longer, double action trigger pull. But I would just be too afraid that I wouldn't be able to get that thing off in time.
Yeah, but also at the same time too, you got to remember that Murphy's Law exists, and God forbid the one time that you need to draw the gun to defend your life is going to be the one time that safety got bumped on in the holster. So a lot of trainers, and I've got to say, now granted I have carried my Beretta 21A, and that thing has a double action trigger pull and a safety, and I never put that safety on, and I carry it with the safety off and the hammer on the half cock notch. But at the same time, God forbid you need to use that gun and you're squeezing on that trigger and it's not going. A lot of firearms instructors will say just avoid that Murphy's Law. If the gun has a safety, use the safety, because that way the worst case scenario is the safety gets bumped off. If the safety on the 1911 gets bumped off, and I think in my years and years of carrying a 1911, I think there was one time where I pulled the gun out of the holster and found, hey, look, the safety's off. Funny.
Right, because you have that little plunger thing that keeps it sort of up, right? It runs above the grip on the left side.
Yeah, well, most good guns, I think there's probably some of the older ones might not have had a detent system on it, so that the safety's either on or off. Like as soon as you get it halfway or a quarter of the way, it's going to snap into the other position, sort of idea. But some of the older guns, you can get them a little bit halfway. You can carry. I would never do this. I am not recommending this. You're going to get yourself killed. But my Radom P64, which is kind of sort of the Polish clone of the PPK, you can put the safety halfway between safe and fire and carry the gun cocked and locked.
Yeah, I would not carry that pocket gun.
Not a smart move. And then there's the other question of the Sig Sauer makes those fantastic little essentially Colt Mustang clones, the
239.
The 238 and 938.
Yeah.
Beautiful guns, really, really, really good guns. And I'm probably being paranoid, but I just don't like the idea of, for a gun that small, I'd want to carry it in my pocket. And for a gun that I'm going to carry in my pocket, I don't want to just have a single action trigger and a manual safety on, just because my it's rubbing up against my leg, my pocket's bouncing around. It's a lot more dynamic than if you've got like an inside the waistband or an outside the waistband holster, or a shoulder holster or a belly band or what have you, for all sorts of holsters. A lot of them are really kind of isolated. All that when it's sitting in your pocket, your pocket's kind of an independent piece of your pant. It's kind of floating around. You can turn your pocket inside out, sort of idea. So it's going to be swishing around in there. I would just be terrified that something would knock that safety off and something would kink up in that, and I'd go and sit down and something would squeeze that trigger.
And even using a proper pocket holster?
Probably not. I mean, like I said, I'm just being paranoid. But for a gun that I'm going to stuff in my pocket, I like a gun to be double action, preferably
right.
Double action only with no manual safety.
Well, and one good thing to touch upon that Sig Sauer did with those two pistols, the 238 and the 938, is the fact that you can actually keep the thumb safety on and operate the slide. It's not like your standard 1911 where that thumb safety locks up into a notch and keeps it from the slide from moving. You can, have that safety on, and as always, you should not rely on the safety. Your safety is between your ears and it's your trigger finger. But the fact that you can have that safety on and, chamber around, or say you get home at the end of the day and you want to take the round out of the chamber that you have in there, you can leave that safety on and still be able to run the slide, which is a cool, convenient feature. I mean, it's not a make or break deal, but it definitely is a good feature, I think.
Yeah, it is a cool feature. There's a bunch of guns. I know the M&Ps that have the thumb safety, the full side, the M&P, the double stack M&Ps, when they have a more 1911 style safety, but that safety is completely independent of the slide, so you can rack the slide with the gun on safe. Same thing goes with a lot of the slide mounted safeties. You can have a Beretta 92 or a Walther PPK. You can leave the safety on and rack the slide, and the hammer will drop, and the round will chamber, and you don't need to worry about anything. Though I will say, at the end of the day, if you've got a semi-auto, You might want to just invest in a gun safe and throw it in the gun safe, because round setback is a real thing, and it scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, especially with the higher pressure cartridges like the 40 and 357.
Yeah, or I mean even 45 plus P or anything. I mean, just what you don't want to do is black powder needs to be compressed so that it doesn't explode. Smokeless powder needs to have a little bit of airspace. And when you deal with like guns that have smokeless powder technology like 357 Magnum or a lot of rifle cartridges, you can shake them in your hand and hear the powder rattling around. That powder needs that room to rattle around. And if if that bullet keeps going up the feed ramp and keeps, getting pressed up into the chamber over and over and over again, eventually it's going to start sliding back on that crimp, and number one, you're going to reduce that airspace, which is going to increase your pressure. But God forbid you actually compress that load, then you could actually have things blow up in your hand.
Like when I had my Glock 27 and I did that, what I would do is rather than, taking the round that was in the magazine next and do this, that, and the other thing, I would pull that round out and then switch it up with another round that was in the magazine. So that way you're not always pushing that same round in there.
Yeah, I do it a little bit different. Is I will actually rechamber the same round, but I'll keep track of how many times I've done it. The only time my guns are ever empty, my carry guns, my carry semi-autos are ever empty, with the exception of my 21A, because that one's designed to drop rounds into the chamber. Same thing with revolvers. You can unload them whenever you want, and that's a real positive feature. I mean, if I go visit my relatives that have small children around and they don't have a gun safe there, and at the same time, I'm not going to just, they don't have guns, so I don't want to have mine totally locked up in some weird setup of, I've got a cable locked to a chair in a box or whatever business you've got going on. I'll simply unload. I'll carry a speed loader with me, and at the end of the day, when I change into my pajamas, I unload the gun and put those rounds into a speed loader and put them right beside the gun, and then the gun goes right beside the bed. So no little, if a little curious person decides to sneak into the room, hopefully I'll figure it out. And then on top of that, they're going to have to load the gun first.
Right. So kind of moving away from all the technical aspects of what makes a good gun is the fun factor. Now, everybody knows owning guns is really fun to shoot, really enjoyable to go out and have a nice day at the range. But when we're talking about a good handgun, it's got to be fun for you to shoot. And we sort of touched upon that when we were talking about the 357 airweights. For you to be good with a gun, you're not going to practice with it if it hurts you. And those 357 airweights tend to hurt most people. I know somebody who, and I don't know how he does this, but he carries his pocket gun is a Smith & Wesson J-frame, Model 60, loaded with 180 grain bullets that he bought a long time ago. He uses 180 grain 38 Special Plus P. Where he got those, I do not know. But he let me fire some of those rounds, and oh man, I shoot Plus P rounds in my gun. This felt like I was shooting 357s. It was insane.
Oh yeah.
And I don't even know how he gets them to fit in there with the bullet length.
I've never read that load data on any of the load books that I've read, and I'm a big fan of the heavy bullets.
And I don't even remember, they were in, I think they may have been a Remington Peters offering. I'm not sure. I don't know where. I'd never heard of them, and he showed me the box, and it says right on it, 180 grain, jacketed lead hollow point, semi-jacketed. I was like, where did you find those? He said, oh, I got these years ago. So maybe it was some small run they did and decided it wasn't very popular.
They're hollow points as well?
They're the semi-jacketed lead hollow points.
Because when you look at like Buffalo Bore will have some pretty ridiculously heavy bullet weights out there. But a lot of those are flat points because
exactly
that allows you to fit a lot more lead in there. But
and they're the I can't imagine how far those go down into the case because, I mean, you're hollowing out that front end. I mean, the hollow point isn't really deep like you might see on some of the 158 grain ones. It's a very shallow hollow point, so I'm not really sure how much expansion is going to be going on with it. But I couldn't believe it when because I didn't believe it at first, and then he showed me the box, and I said, well, you've got the box, and it's the factory box, but I've never heard. I did a bunch of research before the show, and I still could not find anybody offering that load.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
I don't imagine, and out of a 1 7/8 inch barrel of a revolver of a snubby J frame, I mean, I can't imagine that bullet's going to be going that fast.
it can't be. I mean, there can't be much powder behind it.
Right. I mean, it is a honking bullet, but still, it's got to be going more than 500 feet per second.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be something like those 357 Blackout subsonics, where
Yeah,
the actual bullet, if you set the bullet beside the fired case, the bullet is actually longer than the fired case.
exactly. But so, like, shooting, it has to be fun. And if you buy a gun and it hurts you or it doesn't fit you, and because it doesn't fit you, it hurts you, you're not going to shoot it. So, what's your thoughts on this, Weird?
Well, there's also just another factor of, I know some people that have bought some guns that I'm like, ugh, that's not the gun I would have bought, and all of that. But they go, I really like it. Or, you've got people. I'm not a huge fan of the Walther PPK, but a lot of people are huge fans of James Bond movies, and they like the look of the Walther PPK. Or, there's all sorts of different personal tastes. And if you like the gun that you have, you're going to shoot it more. Sort of idea. Then, I mentioned the show notes of that. I just don't like Glocks. There's nothing wrong with them. They're beautiful guns. I recommend anyone. My father-in-law said, thinking about switching from a semi-auto, a revolver to a semi-auto. What do you think? I said, get a Glock 17 or a Glock 19. Done. He's not that huge a shooter. He's not going to be, nitpicking a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and he's nothing but a revolver shooter. So switching over to that different grip angle is not going to make a lick of difference to him. I shoot 1911s, and when I pick up a Glock, the sights are pointing, a quarter of an inch high for me, just because I have that same grip as if the grip angle is going the same way on a 1911, and that means the bore is going to be a little bit up. I could train that away, but why bother? And then at the same time, they're ugly and they're blocky, and I just don't like them. They're just it's not the gun for me. Nothing wrong with them, but it's not the gun for me. If I had a Glock, I wouldn't shoot it. I had an AK for a little while, and I just didn't fall in love with the gun. I found myself that I was bringing my SKS to the range to shoot 7.62 by 39 rather than that gun. Was nothing wrong with it. I sold it to a guy, and that guy sent me an email a couple of weeks later saying, "Oh my God, it shoots beautifully. I love this gun. Beautiful, awesome." It just wasn't the gun for me. So if you just don't like the gun, you're not going to take it out as much. And I fell in love with the first 1911 I shot, and that's honestly the reason why I carry a 1911, because I've shot a gazillion rounds through a million different types of 1911s. Because if someone has a 1911, I'm going to be like, hey, bring that to the range. I want to put a few rounds through it.
Right. Well, it's like you think about what was it we talked about a few shows ago. I love the Browning high power, but if I remember correctly, you weren't as much of a fan as I was.
Yeah, and I couldn't even put my finger on it. It just felt like a lot as better 1911. It just didn't handle as well for me. Nothing wrong with the gun.
Exactly. So like we said, I mean, this can be very subjective, grip angle or how the gun feels to you. But another thing is, can you afford to care for it, and can you afford to feed it? And I know we're not talking about pets or anything, but, Weird, you bring up a really great point, and we talked about the availability of the magazines. Well, something like the Walther PPQ.
Yeah, it's a beautiful gun. I mean, I know of several people that have them and are absolutely in love with them. But the magazines are like $50 a pop. Same thing. There's a lot of different Walthers. I think the Walther PPS, when it came out, I don't know. I haven't looked at it recently, but I thought about getting one, and it just wasn't. That was another gun that just didn't fit me right. But I heard the magazines for that were really, really expensive and really, really hard to come by. And so it's one of those things of magazines are consumable parts. I have got a gazillion 1911 magazines here. Every time I make an order from Midway USA or Brownells, I'll always throw a Wilson 47D into the order. Just because, just send me another magazine. Why not? And that way, if I start getting a malfunction with a gun, I'll mark it with a piece of tape or a paint marker or something like that. I'll mark it with something. But a few times I didn't have those, I just pulled out my pocket knife and put a big old scratch down the body of it. And if I find that magazine keeps hiccuping, and every time my gun has a malfunction, that magazine, at the range, and it keeps coming out that exact same magazine, I'll throw that magazine right in the trash. you know, and I've got other ones, but that's one of those things, you know. You hear people talking about, you know, the AR aluminum mags. Well, you know, they're made of aluminum, so the feed lips will eventually wear out on you, and you know, in the end, you've got to, you know, if the magazine stopped working, you can try to reform the feed lips, but you know, there's a good chance that you may have to throw them in the trash.
You can only bend steel so much, or an aluminum so much, metals in general.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
no, I had someone try to fix some 1911 magazines that the feed lips had spread out on it a little bit, and it just didn't work right for it. It looked like he did a good job, and I mean, I watched him. He had a little jig that he put down onto the magazine and hit it with a hammer, and that, you know, curled the lips down to exactly where they needed to be. I don't know, didn't look at it close enough to see exactly how it worked, but no, it just, you know, eventually the lips just spread back out. I threw those magazines in the trash, and those ones actually shot out way early. Those were actually the Chip McCormick's Shooting Star mags, and I've never bothered with those ever again. But that's a story for a different one. If you've got, you know, a gun that has a bazillion different aftermarket, you know, magazine makers. But, you know, the question is, you know, if you shoot the gun a lot, those magazines are going to wear out. Will you be able to throw a, you know, a $50 magazine away?
Right. Well, I mean, like, for instance, this is a magazine for my 1903. This is the only magazine I have for this gun, and there's a reason that it's the only magazine I have. This is not an original magazine. The original 1903 and 08, the 380 ones, were half blued and half unfinished. This one is of unknown make manufacturer because it came with the gun, and I don't know when this was bought, but this one functions perfectly. The same cannot be said for most of the aftermarket 1903 magazine makers, and I believe Metgar is one. And I don't think I've ever heard a good thing about the 1903 Metgar magazines, and I'm not sure why, but I hear about nothing but problems with them. And the other thing is, everybody says buy the original mags, they work the best. Well, they may work pretty good, but they're also about $150 a pop.
Oh, geez, so, are they very expensive?
The original ones.
I picked up actually a half blued 1908 mag from Numrich, and I think I only paid $30 for it.
From what I understand and from everything I've seen, the original ones for the 1903 were, and this was a year ago that I checked, $150 from what I was seeing online. That may have changed, and I may have just ran into a bunch of people who were trying to scalp people, but so, I mean, the magazines can be a really big deal because right there, that honestly, like 95% of the time, the magazine can be traced to as being the thing that's causing the problem with your semi-auto.
Oh, yeah.
People look at all these different things, could be going, oh, is the extractor tension right? You know, is the feed ramp properly opened up? Blah, blah, blah. It could be the magazine, and a lot of the times it is. So, I mean, don't think that, oh, the gun's a piece of crap. Try a few different magazines, you know. Like someone I knew was having a problem with an AK, and they were using one type of magazine. I said, well, try these ones. And those ones made the gun run like a top. So the magazine is, I mean, it's the heart of the system, really.
Yeah.
So,
no.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we'll move on to the next one, next point. But another thing you got to look at is the ammo. Like my cousin just recently got his concealed carry license, and he said to me, oh, man, you know, I'm thinking about it was before he got his license. I'm thinking about getting my carry license, and I went into the shop and was just poking around, and I started looking at the price of .45, and I started looking at the price of 9mm, and I really think 9mm is going to work a whole lot better for me as far as me being able to go out to the range and shoot the gun, you know, sort of idea. And he knew I was a diehard .45 guy, but I'm really not a diehard .45 guy. I'm just so heavily invested in .45 that for me to switch, if I was to switch over to a 9mm carry gun, I would have to spend a fortune to get there, and all of that. I mean, I've got a million 1911 .45 mags. What am I going to do? Switch over to a 9mm? It's cheaper just to spend a little bit more on ammo. But you know, some people, ammo's gonna break the bank. You know, 357 SIG looks like a really, really awesome round, and it is a really, really cool round, but it's also a pricey round. You know, something like if you have a 45 gap, will you be able to find ammo for it? You know, if there's all sorts of, you've got your 9x23 Winchester. Will you ever be able to find ammo for that thing? Is that a 45 neck down, by the way?
No, that is it. It's pretty much like 9mm Largo, but it is not 9mm Largo. Please don't mistake me there. If you shoot 9x23 and you're 9mm Largo, you will blow it up. 9x23, I guess, is it's a longer. It's similar to the 38 Super, but it's longer and it has thicker web down at the bottom of the case, so it runs at like 56,000 psi. It runs almost at 223 pressures.
Wow.
It is a crazy round. They actually, in the article I was talking about earlier in the Week in Review, they talked about how reloading for it is really a dicey proposition, and you honestly probably won't reach the level of performance that you see from the factory loads that are made for it.
Yeah. Well, I know a guy who loads some crazy loads for his 500 Magnum, and he ends up miking the inside and the outside of the cartridge and all of that just to make sure that it's not, it's not going to be overpressure and blow up. And he's got loads where he has got just a hair's width of space between that powder and the bullet when he seats it. And no, that's not for me. I'm not interested in that. I look at the load manual and I'll start with a load either right in the middle or a little bit above the middle, and maybe I'll work it a little bit up, but I never go off the reservation when I hand load my ammo. It's just not worth it for me.
Right.
What's that extra 20 or 30 feet per second really going to do in the long run?
Yeah, could end up blowing up your gun. So that's why I don't want to do it. I like my guns.
Yeah, but you got to look to see, can you afford the ammo? Another thing is, I love 22 revolvers, and the big reason why I love 22 revolvers is I sat around talking to people who had various 22 semi-autos, which are a hell of a lot cheaper than 22 revolvers. 22 revolvers cost almost as much as a 357 or 38 variants that they're built off of. They're practically identical. There's not really a whole lot, but with a semi-auto, you can build it a whole lot lighter. You can make it out of lighter stuff. You can put a zinc slide on it and get away with all that stuff. So you can find yourself some 22 semi-autos for really, really cheap prices, and it's awesome. But what ammo will it take? I know. I don't know if it was coming from SIG exactly. I know one gun shop, every time I saw a SIG Mosquito go over the counter, they said, just so you know, you're going to want to shoot CCI mini mags out of this gun. Don't look at anything else, just shoot CCI mini mags out of it. So you may look at it and go, oh, CCI mini mags are going to be the CCI Blazer or the Federal American Eagle or some other cheap bulk 22, the Remington Golden Bullets, but I don't think those work in any semi-autos. But they work great in a revolver. That's why I have revolvers. It's worth it. But will you be able to feed it? And that's why I saved up the extra money to buy. My first 22 handgun was my 617 revolver, and I paid. I bought it used, and I think I paid close to $400 for the thing, which is pretty crazy price for a used 22.
Right.
When you think about it, but you could get a 686 for almost the used 686 for almost the same price. But at the same time, a buddy of mine was up in his attic and he found a bunch of 22 that have been sitting there for 1,000 years, and the lubricant on it was all oxidized. It was covered with white fuzz. They were all weird. I had to stuff some of them to get them into the chamber, but they all shot. Some of them the primers didn't touch off, but they all fired out of the revolver because revolver doesn't need to cycle. So you gotta remember, some guns might be finicky on ammo, and another one is I don't know about the car CM and CW series, but I know the PM series and all of that, they have match grade barrels on them, and I've never personally tried this, though I have had issues with some of my hand loads. I've actually got a malfunctioning press, and so it throws some loads that are a little out of spec. My 1911 will eat them all day long, but every so often I'll get a round get stuck in the chamber of my car because that chamber is just so much tighter and all that. And I've heard that if you take like Wolf or Tula ammo or some of the other steel-cased ammos, that that brass is a little bit thicker or not quite as as precisely manufactured. It may not run in that gun. And of course,
Right.
you had that you shot that 410 steel load out of that survival rifle.
Yeah, that thing was well. You see it in the video. There's probably be a link in the show notes to it, but yeah, the extractor, the 22 shell came out fine, but that steel case, I think it was a Russian surplus steel case 410, which I don't know what they were shooting, but it did not want to come out, and it was really long too.
Yeah. How much work did it take to get it out?
We had to use a rod down the barrel and push it out that way.
Did it just take a little effort, or did you really have to hammer on it?
Not much. I think the problem with that survival rifle, and honestly, if I were to give we're talking about the Savage 42 over under, it's a 22 410 combo. The only issue I had with that gun was the extractor, the extractor. It's really just like a thin piece of like sheet metal almost, is what it looked like. It wasn't a very beefy extractor. I don't think. I mean, shotgun shells really don't tend to stick in the chamber that often. And I don't know. That would be the only fault if I was looking at that gun. It's a really great gun, but the extractor definitely leaves something to be desired in terms of strength.
Yeah, but again, so you might be able to afford the ammo for the gun, but you might not be able to afford the ammo that your gun likes.
Right. I mean, like for instance, you were talking. Another really important thing is like for instance, people who own what is it, FN57.
Yep.
5x7 by 28, 5.7 by 28 millimeter. You're not going to find that at Walmart. That's not a Walmart caliber, so to speak. And for people who want to reload, you may be a reloader and say, "Oh yeah, I can reload 5.7." I've heard a few reloading horror stories with the 5.7. It's a miniature bottlenecked case, pistol round. And it's just not an easy gun to load for because, from what I understand, the powder capacity of the case is fairly limited because it's so small. So you really don't have a huge margin for error in terms of, is my scale calibrated correctly? Is it going 0.2 grains over? With the 5.7, with a 38.2 grains over may not be that much of a difference unless you're doing red line loads. But with a 5.7, that 0.2 grains may mean the difference between a really hot maximum load and a load that is just in the stratosphere in terms of pressure.
Yep. And also another thing about that 5.7 is it doesn't have a lot of taper to it. It's almost got a straight case wall, and I've heard that's also an issue. I think that I've read a couple of articles about it, and I don't know what's true and what's not. I've heard that there's like a little bit of a polymer coating on the outside of the brass that makes it a little bit slipperier for extraction, and so if you reload it multiple times, that'll degrade, or if you tumble your brass, it'll wipe that off. But because, I mean, when you got like, the 7.62 by 39 is probably the best example of, I mean, the thing, looks like an ice cream cone. It's just so wide at the base and so narrow at the shoulder, sort of idea. All that gun has to do is all the gun has to do is extract it, a couple of millimeters, and that thing is pulled completely free of the case wall. I mean, the
Right.
chamber wall. If you've got something that's got almost completely straight sides, it might be a little bit different. Same thing goes with like 357 SIG. It's reloadable, and it's not a super difficult round to reload, but it's not a good round for beginners to reload. Just because.
Well, especially that and the 357 SIG, there's a ton of myths out there in terms of the reloading of it. Like, oh yeah, you can use 40 Smith & Wesson brass and neck it down. The neck is going to be too short to properly grab the bullet. It's not going to work well, and you could end up, if you do that, either having the split case on the first firing, if it does work, or having that bullet, like we were talking about, push back. And in the 357 SIG, bullet setback is not something you want to play around with.
No, that's a really no nonsense high pressure load.
Right.
And you don't want that. And again, it's a bottleneck round, and that neck is super duper short, and so you've got to get that crimp just right so you've got enough hold on that bullet, because it's not like a 45 case where it's just a straight wall all the way back. And so if your crimp's a little bit off, you've got a huge bearing surface on that bullet. If you're using a taper crimp, roll crimp's a little bit different.
Well, and the other thing is, the other myth I hear about the 357 SIG in terms of reloading is, oh, I got a bunch of 9mm bullets and it uses a .355 bullet, so I'll be all set. There is a reason that I've never seen a 357 SIG without a flat point on it. 357 SIG uses a particular bullet for that cartridge. It has a longer bearing surface for that neck, that really short neck to grab a hold of. And if you use a 9mm bullet that's shaped just like a round ball, you know, hard ball, just like a pointed round thing, looks like a normal bullet, you're not going to have enough flat surface on the sides of that bullet for the neck to properly grab a hold of it and keep it secure.
Yeah, so I mean, again, there's a lot of things to look into to see if a gun is going to be perfect for you.
And like we said, it's very, very subjective. So make sure the best advice I can give, sort of wrapping up the whole main topic before we head into the wrap-up section, is if you have a range around you that you can go to, and you can say, you know, gee, I'm really interested in this gun, but I really want to find out if it's something that's going to fit me, and when I actually shoot it, is it something that's going to work for me? Is it going to be intuitive? And if you tell them you're buying the gun, they may have one on the rental wall that you can use and go try out and see, you know, is this going to work for me? Because the gun may feel great in your hand. That SIG P230 I was talking about earlier felt amazing in my hand, and I was extremely disappointed when I took it out and fired it for the first time. And if I hadn't fired it, I would not have known. So if you can do that, I mean, that's the best course of action. If not, see if the shop you're working with will maybe give you a 3 or 4 day trial period. You know, some will do it, some won't. I mean, a lot of the better shops generally will. You know, I'll give you a couple days.
That's another reason to buy used. Also, is you're not going to have that once. Some shops may indeed do that, but they're going to take a hit on it because you shot the gun, so therefore it is now a used gun. So it is officially depreciated. If you're buying a gun out of a used rack, if you put 100 rounds through it with a gun that, you know, they don't even know when they put it into their inventory, did the person just throw it in their sock drawer and had it for a little while, and then finally, you know, the rent was due and they needed to sell it? Or did they put, you know, 100,000 rounds to that gun? Who knows? You know, sort of idea. All they know is they looked at it and the gun's safe to sell. So that's all you need to worry about. If you buy a used gun, a lot of people have said, you know, taking a risk on a used gun is fairly small because you might end up losing $50 or, you know, $20 or something like that when you sell it back. But consider that a rental fee. Another option is if there's a gun club around, you know, see if you can become a member of it, hang around and tap people, look to see what people are shooting. I've been tapped on the shoulder a million times with people going, "Hey, what are you shooting there?" And I'll immediately go, "Hey, why don't you give it a try? Here, you know, run a few rounds through it." You know, sort of idea. I bought a bunch of guns because I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know the CZ52 existed until I was shooting in a line and somebody beside me said, "Hey, check, you know, have you ever seen one of these?" "No, I know nothing about this." And I shot it and thought, "Hey, that's a pretty cool gun. I should get one." Sort of idea. Another thing to do is join a forum that's in your area and say, "Hey, I live in such and such an area." You know, used to see that on the Northeast Shooters Forum all the time. "Hey, I live in such and such an area. I'm thinking about buying a Glock 22. I don't know if it's the right gun for me. Does anybody have one? You know, we can meet up. I'll bring a couple of boxes of ammo. You know, you can shoot it some, I can shoot it some." All of that. It's really, really easy, especially with the internet, to meet somebody and go shooting with them and see if you actually like the gun.
Exactly. I mean, like that whole seeing someone else at the range, I remember being at the range and having a guy next to us, and all of a sudden it felt like someone had punched me in my chest, and the guy was shooting a 500 Smith & Wesson short-barreled break-action rifle. And I said, "That is awesome." And he's like, "Oh, you want to try it?" And I shot it. It was great. It was wonderful. And I mean, that's a heavy bullet going down range, so that made me want a 500 Smith & Wesson break-action.
Do you have one?
Not yet.
What make was it?
I think it was H&R.
Okay. I didn't know they made those. You could also probably get like a Thompson Contender or a Thompson Encore.
Right. Well, I know
they make barrels for everything.
Yeah, H&R just started making that 300 Blackout too.
Ooh, that's a fun round.
Yes. So that about wraps up our main topic, so we're going to head into the wrap-up section. So don't forget to shop Brownells using our affiliate link, handgunradio.com/Brownells. And be sure to go over to Handgun Radio on Facebook and share the page with your friends and give it a like. It really helps spread the word about the show. And also leave us a review on iTunes. It helps the show in the iTunes standings and helps the show get noticed. And also be sure to go listen to all the great shows on the Firearms Radio Network, including Fat to Fit HQ with Carol. She does a great job. She just ran the Tough Mudder a few weekends ago with the guys from We Like Shooting, so be sure to go check that out. And be sure to visit the Firearms Insider for reviews and some SHOT Show 2014 coverage. And also, if you're interested in writing reviews for the Firearms Insider, if you have any guns, gear, gadgets related to firearms, or some gadgets that may not be quite related to firearms but do kind of fall into that category, please email TJ at firearmsradio.tv and he'll help get you set up. So where can people find you, Weer'd?
You can find me at weirdworld.com. That's my personal blog, and every Thursday at this time on the Squirrel Report, sqrpt.com.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on. I think we had a pretty good discussion on what may make a handgun good.
All right, and remember, I get a little bit of piece of that Brownells money since you had me write the show notes.
Oh, if we get some, we get some. I'll cut you in on that. So. Well, until next week, have fun and safe shooting.